Hey guys, tonight we stand at the edge of a candlelit corridor, hearing the faint hum of cicadas beyond your window as the scent of aged parchment tickles your senses. You probably won't survive this without a snuggle. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Oh, and don't forget to post your location and local time in the comments below. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through a hallway lined with tall wooden shelves crammed full of leather-bound volumes that whisper secrets of long-lost debates. The air feels weighty, like it's holding back a confession. Tonight's confession is both simple and scandalous. Was the man known as Jesus of Nazareth ever married? The silence of the 4 canonical Gospels on any wedding ring is deafening, yet some argue this very quiet might be a deliberate act of omission. Historians still debate whether the lack of marriage references was purposeful or simply a reflection of the priorities of early Christian authors. Your fingers brush dust along a mahogany lectern as you imagine yourself in first-century Judea, where rabbis typically entered into betrothal around age 18. Mainstream scholarship tells us Jesus, following Jewish custom, would likely have been expected to marry by his late 20s. Yet, none of the texts written by Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John mention a bride. That silence has launched centuries of speculation. A fringe theory flits through your mind like a moth drawn to a flame. Some occult enthusiasts claim that, hidden within Eastern manuscripts, lies a coded phrase where Jesus addresses Mary Magdalene as my wife. This quirky tale has no basis in the mainstream Peshitta translations, but it feeds the imagination as readily as a campfire marshmallow lights up in the dark. You settle into an armchair cushioned with velvet. The fibers cool against your skin. A single spotlight from your desk lamp pools over a stack of reproduction papyri and digital printouts of Gnostic Gospels. The pale glow accentuates smudges of ink that feel almost alive, like whispers trying to escape their margins. Somewhere a clock ticks so softly it might be a heartbeat. You wrap yourself in a knitted throw, the one your aunt gave you last Christmas that still smells faintly of lavender, and lean forward. Your voice lowers to a near whisper as you prepare to step beyond accepted narratives into the shadows where rumors lurk. History often feels like a tapestry with threads missing. Pulling too hard at one might unravel the whole thing, but you're armed with curiosity and a pillow for comfort. Ahead lies a path strewn with open scholarly debate and fragments of manuscripts that survived fires, floods, and fanaticism. You'll encounter well-known facts like the Council of Nicaea's pivotal role in shaping Orthodox doctrine and oddball legends, like the claim that early desert monks smeared crocodile dung on their faces as sunscreen, convinced it warded off evil spirits. These stories both inform and distract, much like trying to read by candlelight during a thunderstorm. As you exhale, you sense a shift. The journey is about to begin. The room seems to lean in closer, as if eager to share every papyrus scrap that questions Jesus' marital status. You may need a refill of tea, and yes, it might be chamomile, because we still have a long night ahead. So tuck your toes deeper under the blanket, sip slowly, and let's wander into the first tale of Mary Magdalene, disciple or spouse. You lean back into the velvet armchair. It's the soft glow of your desk lamp painting warm circles on the hardwood floor as you turn the page to Mary Magdalene. You know her as the devoted follower who shows up at the empty tomb. First mainstream accounts describe her as one of the women who watched Jesus' crucifixion from afar and later reported his resurrection. That fact anchors you to solid ground. Mary of Magdala appears by name in all 4 canonical Gospels, illustrating her central role among Jesus' inner circle. Yet fringe theories flutter in, like bats in a Gothic cathedral at midnight. Some modern magnum opus scoff. The Da Vinci Code paints her as Jesus's secret spouse, the one receiving whispered endearments in coded ciphers. You chuckle softly, imagining both of them passing each other notes in Aramaic like shy teens. Historians still argue whether Mary was actually his wife or just a devoted disciple. And this persistent question leaves plenty of room for speculation. You reach for your chamomile tea, tracing the condensation ring on its ceramic mug. The steam carries a hint of chamomile and honey, tugging at a drowsy comfort within you. With a lazy finger, you scroll through an image of a Byzantine icon where Mary Magdalene stands beside the apostles, her posture dignified, almost equal. Mainstream scholarship emphasizes that early church fathers like Origen and Augustine praised her faithfulness but never hinted at marriage. Here's the quirky bit. Occult enthusiasts whisper of a 5th century manuscript discovered and quickly hidden in a dusty French chateau. They claim it records a private conversation where Jesus addresses Mary as my Kyrios, a term that could mean Lord, but might also euphemistically imply partner. You imagine snooty archivists in powdered wigs snatching it away and dumping it in a secret Vatican basement. You tuck your feet under the blanket and notice the faint hum of your fan, like a gentle lullaby. Your voice lowers to a whisper as you picture Mary Magdalene teaching other women, dispensing miracles of compassion and community leadership after the resurrection. This mainstream fact underlines her influence. Church tradition later dubbed her the Apostle to the Apostles, a title suggesting spiritual authority rather than matrimonial ties. But the fringes remain entertaining. A fringe blogger once proposed that the knee injury Mary suffered from falling off her donkey during a dusty Galilean trek was actually the result of fleeing a hastily aborted wedding ceremony. You barely stifle a giggle, imagining Mary flinging a bouquet in the air as Jesus jumps out a window in his robes, flapping like superhero capes. Historians still argue whether these anecdotal evidences carry weight or simply reflect modern desires to inject romance into austere narratives. You sigh, amused by how often love stories can upstage spiritual teachings in pop culture. Your eyelids grow heavy as you lean forward, fingertips brushing a facsimile of the Gospel of Mary, one of those Gnostic texts chiseled out of Egypt's sans its content is tantalizingly cryptic, revealing private dialogues between Jesus and Mary about esoteric ascension. Though it never mentions a wedding ring, the intimacy and trust shine through pages weathered by centuries. Some scholars read it as proof of a special bond. Others dismiss it as spiritual metaphor. You trace a fingerprint smudge on the papyrus and imagine the original author's smelly, ink-stained fingers. Oddly, a rumor persists that certain medieval copyists used goat milk as a binding agent in their inks. Apparently, they believed it improved text longevity. You picture a scribe lovingly mixing goat milk and soot, humming a chant. Some theologians counter that Mary's prominence actually threatened patriarchal norms, which might explain why her image was downplayed by later church councils. Mainstream observation underscores how power dynamics shape historical narratives. Meanwhile, conspiracy buffs insist that if Mary had been his wife, the church would have quietly scrubbed away any trace of nuptial announcements, pragmatic censorship, rather than theological oversight. As you settle back, the fans hum and the distant tick of your clock weave together. You realize the true fascination isn't merely whether Mary Magdalene wore a wedding veil, but what her role tells us about women's leadership in early Christianity. You imagine slipping on those dusty sandals yourself and wandering dusty roads, listening to her teach forgiveness and radical love note wedding bells required dot before closing the file. You murmur a light-hearted question into the night air. If Mary Magdalene and Jesus did wed, who snagged the bridal bouquet? The absurd image jolts you awake just enough to smile in the hush. You acknowledge that this tale of disciple versus spouse holds more questions than answers, fitting snugly into our ongoing scholarly debates. Your mug, now empty. You draw the blanket tighter and prepare to open the next manuscript in our nocturnal tour, The Rise of Celibacy Doctrine. You lean back, the soft hum of your fan lulling you into focus as you cradle another warming sip of chamomile. The papyrus scroll before you crackles under your fingertips, its edges darkened by centuries of incense and candle smoke. Tonight's next stop is the curious rise of celibacy doctrines, those rules that quietly neutered any chance of marriage chatter about Jesus. Imagine early priests swearing off marriage the way you ghost an ex on social media, with solemn vows and zero. Mainstream history notes that by the 3rd century, influential figures like Origen voluntarily embraced celibacy as a spiritual ideal. Origen of Alexandria famously offered himself for castration, thankfully deterred by his extreme asceticism fueled a broader trend, framing virginity as a higher calling. Church fathers like Jerome and Augustine later lauded celibacy, arguing that avoiding marital ties kept clergy free from worldly distractions. This formal endorsement set the stage for official canons down the line. Yet fringe lore insists desert monks once smeared crocodile dung on their brows to ward off sin because nothing says holy purity like reptile excrement. You smirk at the image, a bearded ascetic crouched by an oasis, cackling as he applies the gloopy paste. Historians still argue whether these practices were rooted in genuine spiritual fervor or simply a creative excuse to skip Tuesday's laundry. By 305 AD, the Council of Elvira in Spain codified rules forbidding clergy from marrying or maintaining conjugal relations, Canon 33, to be precise. It declared priests should be the bride of the Lord with no earthly wife to complicate the divine wedding vows. Later gatherings like the Council of Carthage around 390 AD reinforced these edicts, cementing celibacy as an institutional requirement. These mainstream decrees effectively neutered any scriptural hints that Jesus might have walked down an aisle. But why the sudden push? Historians still argue whether clerical celibacy was a pragmatic move to keep church property intact after all. Married priests could pass wealth to heirs, a genuine theological evolution. Some suggest it mirrored Roman aristocratic elites who prized chastity, while others see it as a reaction against pagan temple rituals. Either way, the new rules set a powerful precedent. Marriage talk was now off limits, like a taboo YouTube comment thread permanently locked by moderators. Here's a quirky aside. A 12th century monk allegedly pressed snail slime onto parchments to make them glow under moonlight, tricked to read sacred texts at night without lighting a fire. Ayo. Imagine the poor snail's lament. Really, bro? This odd recipe has no relation to celibacy, but underscores how creative ascetics got to preserve their precious manuscripts while preserving their vows of silence back in your armchair. If you stretch and feel the soft knit of your blanket beneath your palms. You recall that goat milk ink rumor from last section? Apparently, copyists believe dairy improved text durability. Maybe they thought it was an elixir of eternal life, much like celibacy promised a more direct ticket to heaven. Historians still argue whether these quirky practices shaped theological outlooks or simply emerged from trial-lander in scribal workshops. Despite official bans, stories persisted that some rural clergy secretly married holding clandestine ceremonies in olive groves under the moon. Fringe bloggers delight in tales of hidden bloodlines passed down through mountain hamlets where local priests maintained secret families. You stifle a yawn picturing it. Father Terentius from Gaul sneaking off to elope with a shepherdess, leaving behind a pair of sandals as proof. Mainstream scholars, however, stress that no credible evidence links Jesus to any marriage precisely because subsequent church regulations would have ruthlessly expunged such records. The absence of marital references in canonical texts wasn't merely oversight. It was a systemic silence. Theologians like Augustine argued that Jesus embodied the perfect chaste bridegroom, setting an example for clergy to follow. This theological framing turned virginity into a religious virtue, effectively sidelining any whispers of wedding bells. Is this institutional silence enough to dismiss marriage theories outright? Historians still argue whether the lack of mention is indicative of genuine singleness or clever ecclesiastical censorship. Maybe scribes redacted passages that hinted at a spouse, much like you delete a questionable text message before your phone autocorrects your secrets. The possibility gnaws at you. What if early communities remembered a married teacher, and those memories were simply erased? You pinch the edge of your blanket and allow yourself a momentary daydream. You, in first-century Judea, watching a council elder forbid marriage, then spotting a clandestine wedding band hidden inside a scroll tube. Cue dramatic gasps. You shake your head, amused by the mental movie. At least you don't have to learn ancient Greek to appreciate the irony. Making local priests singles prevented any inheritance disputes. Brilliant, if a bit savage, as your eyelids droop. You survey the scattered remnants of manuscripts, the faint glow of your lamp dancing on ink-stained fingertips. The rules of celibacy, born from ascetic zeal and institutional pragmatism, it's quietly erased any room for Jesus' husband speculation. Yet the dusty corners of history still hold whispers, and you'll have to keep digging to see if any marriage vows survive the ecclesiastical purge. You take a final sip of cool tea, feeling its chamomile calm seep into each drowsy muscle. The scroll lies open, its script whispering promises of the next discovery. Celibacy, it seems, wasn't just a personal choice. It was a powerful filter that shaped the story of Jesus, filtering out all mentions of romantic union. For a moment, you imagine the echo of wedding bells lost to time, a melody muted by centuries of doctrinal decree. You tuck the blanket around your knees, ready to flip the page. In the next dim-lit nook of your library, Gnostic Gospels await texts so rebellious they mock mainstream censorship. But for now, the hush settles in, and you feel sleep stirring as firmly as councils once imposed their chaste will. You stretch, feeling the soft fibers of your blanket shift under your palms as you reach for a heavy leather satchel resting on the floor. The desk lamp's glow quivers, casting long shadows across the room, and the faint hum of your fan feels like a distant ocean wave. You unzip the satchel to reveal a stack of fragile papyri bound into battered codices. The Gnostic Gospels you saved for tonight's deep dive. Remember that snippet from Section 2 about Mary Magdalene in the Gnostic Gospel of Mary? Tonight, you'll wade through texts even more rebellious, saucy. An obscure dot, the mainstream fact, anchors you in December 1945. A peasant digging for fertilizer near Nag Hammadi in Egypt stumbled upon 13 codices buried in a sealed jar. These manuscripts included the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Truth, and the Apocryphon of John texts that mainstream Christianity later deemed heretical. The find revolutionized modern scholarship, revealing divergent early Christianities, where secret teachings and mystical revelations took center stage. Historians still argue whether the Gnostic Gospels reflect authentic teachings of the historical Jesus, or are later theological inventions shaped by post-apostolic communities. You cradle the top manuscript, its cover of goat hide leather crackling under your fingertips. A whisper of goat milk inquiry, remember that rumor, wafts up as you peel back the cover. The first lines of the Gospel of Thomas leap at you. These are the secret sayings that the living Jesus spoke and Didymus Judas Thomas recorded. Secret sayings. You imagine scribes huddled by torchlight, quills scratching out forbidden dialogues meant only for the enlightened elite. A fringe rumor insists that some Gnostic sects bound their Bibles with dyed camel hair, believing the unique fibers carried hidden vibrations detectable only by spiritually awakened readers. You smile, picturing a monk sniffing a manuscript and declaring, "Ah yes, this one whispers in F-sharp minor." Your tea is gone, and the mug's ring stain sits like a crescent moon atop your desk. You pour fresh chamomile, inhaling the steamy hum. You sip, your eyes drift to the Gospel of Philip's tattered edge, still lingering from Section 6's plan. But tonight, you're here for the truly wild stuff. Books claiming Jesus taught secret weddings of light. Mystical bridal chambers where souls unite with the divine. You imagine a cosmic Tinder app, swiping left on the fleshly realm in the Gospel of Thomas, saying 114 jars, you awake with a codex-level eye twitch. Simon Peter said to them, "Let Mary leave us, for women aren't worthy of life." Jesus says, "I myself shall lead her." That verse ignited centuries of debate on gender and leadership. Mainstream scholars note that this logion survives only in Coptic translations, raising questions about its Aramaic original. Historians still argue whether Mary's exclusion was a later misogynistic edit or a genuine fragment of early teachings. You trace the papyrus fibers, each strand as fragile as a dream. A creaking shelf somewhere echoes, like the building sighing. Alongside you. You lean forward, voice soft and breathy. Picture Jesus and Mary discussing the kingdom of heaven in secret no wooden pews, candlelight and incense drifting lazily. Fringe enthusiasts claim the Gospel of Mary reveals Jesus teaching her how to levitate during prayer. You giggle at the image, Jesus hovering mid-sermon while bewildered. Apostles check their sandals for magnets. Beyond Thomas and Mary lies the 2D. The Apocryphon of John, whose modern discovery reads like a detective novel. It recounts a Gnostic cosmology where the supreme monad births lower eons, and a rogue entity called Sophia inadvertently creates the material world. Jesus, in hidden dialogues, elucidates the soul's ascent past Archon's cosmic gatekeepers, till reuniting with the divine pleroma. Mainstream historians highlight that church fathers like Irenaeus condemned such myths as dangerous deceptions. Historians still argue whether the Apocryphon preserves genuine early teachings, or is wholly fabricated to challenge orthodoxy. The parchment feels cool through your fingertips, a sensation heightened by the soft breeze of your fan stirring the scent of old paper. In the margin, you spot a doodle in brown ink cani within a triangle, the so-called all-seeing Gnostic gaze. Fringe blogs claim those doodles actually map secret tunnels beneath the Egyptian desert where monks smuggled texts out of Alexandria. Quiet your giggles, imagining a covert scribe slipping through darkened corridors, clutching scrolls like contraband. You return to the Gospel of Truth, its title as serene as a lullaby. It opens with a lament. The Father groaned within himself, and out of that groan, he created a voice. You whisper the words aloud, letting them roll over your tongue with the softness of silk. A mainstream note, Clement of Alexandria mentioned a text called the Gospel of Truth in the 2nd century, but the Nag Hammadi version is all we have. Historians still argue whether Clement's reference matches our discovered codex or another vanished work. A quirky aside drifts into your mind. A rumor that some Gnostics blended crushed date seeds into their ink, believing sweetness magnetized angelic presence. Drawing from Section 3's snail slime pattern, you imagine a parchment glowing under moonlight like a celestial smartphone screen. You snort laugh quietly, picturing someone swiping across a floating text to unlock a higher realm. As you sink deeper into the cushion, the shadows twist, mimicking moving diagrams of eons and archons dancing in the corner of your eye. You reach for a diagram in the Apocryphon, the Pleroma's 10 emanations arrayed like planets around a sun. Holding it up, you catch your reflection in the lamp's glass-wide, disheveled. A midnight explorer in your own home. A modern. Aside, if Jesus had Spotify, you muse. The Gnostic setlist would be far more experimental ambient cosmic flute solos instead of hymns. You tuck your hair behind your ear, fluttering eyelids heavy. The question pulses, are these Gnostic teachings relics of Jesus' true message, suppressed by emerging orthodoxy? Or rhetorical inventions to boost the spiritual status of early sects? Historians still argue whether any Gnostic gospel glimpses the actual words of Jesus, or simply reimagines him as a divine mythmaker. That ambiguity hums in the hush, a siren song that beckons your curiosity. Before closing the codex, you indulge in one more fringe tidbit. Rumor holds that the original jar containing the codices was coated inside with resin from Nile date palms, preserving the manuscripts for centuries. You sniff the air, half expecting the sweet, sticky scent of resin drifting through your fan-cooled room. No luck, just the faint aroma of chamomile. You set the codices aside, aware that each text appends orthodox frameworks, inviting you into secret chambers of thought. They're like whispers from hidden corridors, some invented, all tantalizingly elusive. The codices' edges crack, and a flake drifts to the desk, landing softly on your notebook next to scribbled reminders of Mary Magdalene's possible Kyrios title. The cycle of intrigue spins on. Your voice drops so low it barely rises above. The fans hum. You murmur. Next, you'll explore the scarcely known Pistis Sophia, with its delicious hints of marital intimacy. Who knew a text could flirt so audaciously? But for now, the world of Gnostic Gospels settles like dust motes in a sunbeam. You lean back, the blanket cocooning you as the lamp's light wanes. And you savor the quiet thrill of uncovering secret sayings. Your heart slows, cinched with the tick of your clock and the hush of your fan. In the silence, pages whisper of hidden weddings, cosmic unions, and mysteries that refuse to let go. You close your eyes for a moment, picturing those buried codices awakening beneath the Egyptian sands. The hush deepens, and you know sleep hovers just beyond these lines, waiting to carry you into dreams shaped by secret gospels and lost dialogues. You rise to gently stack the codices in the satchel. The camel hair binding image from earlier still, dancing at the edge of your mind. The hush outside your window feels companionable now, a silent nod to your midnight quest. The Gnostic Gospels have had their say. Soon, you'll drift into the next hidden sanctuary. For now, let the subtle crackle of papyrus lull you onward. You settle back, the weight of your blanket comforting like a gentle embrace, as your fingers brush against the slim spine of the Pistis Sophia Codex resting on your desk. The lamp's glow flickers softly, casting long, wavering shadows across the room, and the hum of your fan blends with your steady breath. You remember your promise from the last moment that tonight you'd meet the Pistis Sophia text so dripping in mystical drama. It practically flirts with scandal, and here you are, mainstream scholarship dates Pistis Sophia to the 3rd or 4th century. It's composed in Greek before surviving in a single Coptic manuscript discovered in Upper Egypt during the late 18th century. The text centers on Mary Magdalene, Martha, Salome, and Salome interrogating the risen Christ for 11 years about the fate of the fallen divine figure, Pistis Sophia. Historians still argue whether Pistis Sophia preserves genuine early Christian mysteries. or is a later Gnostic amalgam devised to intrigue ascetic circles. You turn the brittle page, and your lamp casts a warm pool of light on the dense text. A passage leaps out. Jesus speaks of a bridal chamber where souls unite in holy matrimony with the divine bridegroom. You feel a twitch of curiosity, as if drawn by an invisible string to decode its meaning. The notion of a mystical marriage isn't unique, but here it's described with such lush, sensuous language: silver lilies, perfumed winds, and the echo of crystal laughter that it almost feels like a secret wedding invitation for the soul. Quirky rumor floats through Gnostic circles. Medieval copyists supposedly bound their Pistis Sophia manuscripts with strips of papyrus soaked in honey and date wine, believing the sweetness would attract angelic endorsement. You picture a scruffy monk giggling as he slathers sticky strips onto leather covers, accidentally gluing his fingers together and muttering, "Well, this sure bonds us spiritually." You lean forward, nestling deeper into the blanket. Your voice softens as you imagine Jesus guiding Pistis Sophia through layers of celestial realms, each more fractal and kaleidoscopic than the last. When he finally crowns her with the marriage cloak, scholars debate whether this represents an esoteric ritual or symbolic union of wisdom and spirit. Historians still argue whether the bridal chamber is an allegorical teaching or a vestige of real marriage rites among Gnostic initiates. As you trace a finger along an ornate meeked margin illustration, an Ouroboros encircling a blossoming rose, you can almost smell the faintest hint of myrrh still clinging to the parchment. A modern aside drifts into your mind. If Jesus had an Etsy shop, these marginalia would be marketed as vintage ancient vibes wall art. You suppress a chuckle, imagining apostles crowdfunding to redecorate Galilean synagogues with pastel-hued Gnostic posters. The text's most tantalizing verse speaks of Pistis Sophia prostrating herself before Jesus, begging for redemption and proclaiming, "Let us be united in the bridal chamber, that I may wear the garments of light and dwell in your realm." You sense an intimacy so charged it borders on matrimonial. Yet mainstream theologians caution that bridal chamber language reflects a spiritual metaphor drawn from Jewish mystical traditions like the Song of Songs, rather than literal vows. Historians still argue whether these metaphors concealed real rituals lost to time or merely played with poetic flourish. A sleepy giggle escapes you as you recall a fringe claim. Pistis Sophia's bridal cloak was rumored to be coated with microscopic gemstones that shone when exposed to lunar rays. Enthusiasts insist that beneath the surviving manuscript's surface, tiny flecks of ground moonstone glimmer, each bit placed by an alchemical scribe seeking nocturnal illumination. You've pat your blanket, half expecting it to glow under the fan's draft. You take another sip of chamomile, now lukewarm, but no less soothing, and lean in to note the next anomaly. The dialogue includes cryptic instructions. Speak the 7 seals aloud in the chamber of 7 veils, that the hidden bride may stand clothed before the bridegroom. You raise an eyebrow. A modern mind might picture a corporate retreat gone wild, chanting executives in business casual robes, pulling back silky curtains to unveil sanctified spreadsheets. The absurd image tugs at you, and you can't help but grin. Beneath the text, you detect faint, scoring tiny grooves that suggest someone once inscribed symbols between lines. Fringe forums assert these markings form an alternate code, revealing Jesus' secret vow to Pistis Sophia as my consort of the eons. You lean closer, squinting, but only see the papyrus fibers warping under centuries of moisture. Historians still argue whether such marginalia are authentic glosses by early followers or later forgeries, meant to spice up a legend. The Gnostic principle of redemption in Pistis Sophia hinges on recovering lost divine elements trapped within the material cosmos. The bridal chamber here is more than metaphor. It's the soul's reunion with its transcendent source. Mainstream scholars reference Hippolytus's 3rd century critiques, where he mocks these bridal images as a puerile fairy tale, yet admits he's never actually read the text. Historians still argue whether Hippolytus's account refers to Pistis Sophia or conflates it with other mystic speculations. You tuck a stray strand of hair behind your ear, feeling sleep's soft tug. In the corner of your lamp's glow, a doodle of a chalice and a vine catches your eye, an elegant flourish, likely added by a medieval scribe. Fringe aficionados claim it's a map pointing to a cave near Mount Sinai where sacred marital rites were enacted in secret. Modern archaeologists have found nothing. But you imagine an expedition of torch-wielding scholars stumbling over camel droppings in pursuit of Cacro. A fit in grottos, your eyelids drift as you consider the depth of symbolism. Jesus as bridegroom, Pistis Sophia as soul, marital language borrowed from Hellenistic marriage contracts. Perhaps no human wedding occurred. Yet the richness of these passages stirs questions about the boundaries between metaphor and history. You ease back into your chair, the blanket cocooning you against the cool breeze. One last fringe flourish dances in your mind. Rumor claims that whoever deciphers Pistis Sophia's bridal seals is granted mystical insight into one's soulmate. Centuries before dating apps offered the same promise with swipes. You let out a soft laugh, picturing a digital interface overlaying ancient script. Swipe right on Sophia's veil to secure your divine partnership. As you close the manuscript, its papyrus crackles like distant applause. You recognize that. Pistis Sophia dazzles with its blend of intimacy and mystery, hinting at a concealed marital bond more spiritual than corporeal. Historians still argue whether any literal marriage vows once existed, or if they were simply a poetic device to describe cosmic union. Your lamp's glow dims as you switch it to low, and the fan's hum deepens into a lullaby. The bridal chamber's echoes fade into the hush, leaving behind a gentle wonder about concealed rituals and hidden teachings. You rest your head, sensing the boundary between wakefulness and dreams, blurred just like the line between metaphor and marital reality in this deliciously inscrutable text. Next, you'll unspool the gospel of Philip's ambiguities. Greek words so slippery they could mean either companion or spouse. But for now, let the bridal chamber's soft promise linger as you drift toward sleep. You lean into the nook between your cushions, the blanket's edge brushing your chin as you reach for the battered gospel of Philip Codex. The lamp's pool of light shimmers on its soft leather binding, fingers of shadow creeping across the inked cover. The faint breeze from your fan stirs the scent of aged papyrus, and something faintly spicy may be the last drop of cinnamon from your tea. You flip it open to a passage that's fueled decades of whispered controversies. The Greek term koinonos. Mainstream scholarship dates the Gospel of Philip to the 3rd century. Surviving Coptic translation unearthed alongside other Gnostic treasures at Nag Hammadi in 1945. Yet the original Greek fragments hint at nuances, lost in translation nuances, that some argue suggest matrimonial undertones. Historians still argue whether the terminology in Philip genuinely connotes a spouse or simply a spiritual companion in the path to salvation. Your finger hovers over line 59, where Jesus is said to have kissed Mary. The text reads, "And the companion of the Mary Magdalene. The Lord loved her more than all the disciples and kissed her often on her." The missing Greek word could be chair hand or even Ashalan cheek, or fringe enthusiasts insist something more intimate. You imagine crackling parchments revealing the lost vowel that turns companion into wife. You smirk at the thought of ancient scribes pausing mid-ink, whispering, "Did we just write spouse by mistake?" A quirky rumor makes you giggle. Some Gnostic aficionados claim the Gospel of Philip's pages were once consecrated in rosewater and violet oil, giving the text a faint floral aroma that supposedly activates psychic abilities. You imagine yourself sniffing the codex like one of those old-school sommeliers, nodding seriously and murmuring, "Yes, I detect a hint of divine matrimony with subtle notes of sandalwood." You turn your attention back to the Greek koinonos. In Hellenistic usage can mean partner, sharer, or even lover. In marriage contracts of the period, koinonos appears to denote equal status within a union. Yet in other texts, it implies shared fellowship in religious rituals. Historians still argue whether Jesus' use of koinonos signals a literal marital bond or an elevated spiritual closeness. The next line uses adelphos, meaning brother, to describe the relationship between Jesus and his followers. Meanwhile, the term adelph sister rarely turns up, except in patristic references to the spiritual fraternity of believers. The Gospel of Philip's occasional shift to feminine forms invites debate. Are these poetic flourishes, celebrating female disciples, or veiled allusions to a spouse? Historians still argue whether the interplay of gendered Greek nouns reflects authentic roles of women or later scribal artistry. A soft creaking from the bookshelf jolts you awake for a moment. You recall the goat milk ink rumor from Section 3 and the honey and date wine binding from Section 5. Now, fringe blogs insist some Philip manuscripts were coated in powdered pearl to make the text glisten under lamplight during secret midnight readings. You stifle a laugh, picturing clandestine Gnostic soirees. Here, let me adjust the lighting so you can see that divine shimmer. You trace a smear of brown ink in the margin, probably a later gloss, and spot the phrase bridal chamber echoing your memories of Pistis Sophia. The Gospel of Philip doesn't explicitly name a bridal chamber, but teases a mystical wedding when it says, Christ is bridal chamber. Christ is eternal life. Mainstream theologians caution that this is purely symbolic, a sacramental image of the soul's union with Christ. Historians still argue whether sacramental metaphors in Philip are borrowed from Jewish wedding traditions or conceived by Gnostic poets to mystify their rites. As you sip your lukewarm chamomile, a fresh layer of sleepiness coats your eyelids. You imagine ancient readers huddled around a flickering lamp, whispering these verses like scandalous gossip at a village well. Would a first-century peasant archaeologist dig up a codex, sniff it, and murmur, "Wow, I think Jesus was hitched"? Probably not, but the image tickles you just the same. You flip several pages to find another key phrase. What does the bridal chamber matter to you? What does non-virginity matter to you? He who opens it will become a true child of God. Fringe commentators dream up secret rituals where initiates reenacted a celestial wedding, complete with rings carved from onyx and garlands braided from date palm leaves. You smirk. Picturing that reenactment, a bunch of Gnostic devotees awkwardly exchanging palm fronds while humming in unison. Yet, mainstream evidence for such rituals is nil. No archaeological remains of bridal rings or wedding feasts tied to. Gnostics have surfaced no sumptuous ivory combs engraved with "to my koinons." Historians still argue whether the bridal metaphors in Philip were performed in any ritual context or remained purely allegorical expressions within closed circles. Your blanket shifts as you turn another codex leaf and notice a faint doodle, a heart pierced by an arrow, crudely sketched. Fringe forums contend it maps to a hidden code. Arrow plus heart equals Jesus plus Mary equals marriage. You roll your eyes, amused by the leap of logic that turns any scribble into secret proof, imagining Gnostic codebreakers staring at a doodle. Like modern cryptographers at the Enigma machine, makes you giggle quietly. The deeper you sink into the cushions, the more you realize the Gospel of Philip thrives on ambiguity. Its Greek terms cloud clear meaning, inviting you to project your desires, romance, scandal, spiritual intimacy into the text. A single vowel shift can spawn entire conspiracy theories about a wedded Christ. Historians still argue whether this ambiguity was deliberate. A literary veil to protect underground rituals on an incidental result of translation from Greek to Coptic. You pause to take another measured sip, feeling the pleasant weight of drowsiness. You imagine a modern-day wedding registry offering bridal chamber-themed keepsakes. Register for your matrimonial mysticism set includes 1 codex, 2 ceremonial lamps, and an optional grapevine crown. The absurdity bubbles up, and you let out a soft snort, hoping your roommate doesn't hear. Before closing the book, you run your thumb along a passage that feels slightly raised, a subtle embossing, or maybe just paper grain. Fringe scholars insist those raised dots encoded a secret pronouncement. Mary Magdalene is my koinonos in the flesh. You lean in, squinting, but all you see are the indentations of time. The papyrus fibers collapsing under centuries of reading lamps and curious fingertips. Historians still argue whether any marginal notes in Philip are genuine or later additions to spice up a tantalizing tale. As the room darkens, the codex whispers of secret kinships, companionships that blur into marriage in the haze of translation. You lift the book, feeling its gentle weight, and imagine it perched on a shelf in some hidden vault, waiting for the next curious mind to pry open its Greek-laced riddles. Your voice drops to a soft murmur. Next, you'll sift through pseudepigraphal writings and feminist rereadings that challenge the bachelor narrative of Jesus. But for now, let the koinonos linger in the hush, a word that could mean friend, or spouse, companion, or consort, depending on how you choose to read it. You place the codex down, the final echo of its pages like a whispered promise. The shadows lean forward, receptive to the next unveiling. Okay. You close your eyes momentarily, picturing the Greek letters dancing under lamplight, their meanings shifting like shadows across your wall. You sink deeper into your blanket cocoon, the fan's soft rasp blending with your slow breath as you unroll a sheet of vellum stamped with the title Pseudepigrapha. The lamp's glow shivers across the dusty desk, illuminating your mugs. Ring like a faint halo. Tonight, you'll unmask texts that claim to be ancient but aren't pseudepigrapha that slipped into early Christian collections, stirring confusion and fascination. Mainstream scholars remind us that by the 4th century, hundreds of apocryphal works claimed apostolic authorship from the so-called Gospel of Peter to the Acts of Paul and Theclaet. Most were outright forgeries meant to bolster specific doctrines or elevate local heroes. The majority never gained canonical status, and their dubious origins became a hallmark of their pseudonymous labels. Historians still argue whether early communities genuinely believed these texts or merely preserved them for ritual drama and moral instruction. You cradle your lukewarm tea, its chamomile aroma now mingling with a trace of old parchment. A fringe rumor ripples through occult circles that a medieval scribe once spliced pages of the Gospel of Barnabas with real gold leaf, convinced it would authenticate Muhammad's prophethood over Christ's bachelorhood. You chuckle at the image of an over-eager copyist meticulously applying dusty gold, whispering, "This should convince anyone." Your eyes drift to a reproduction of the infancy Gospel of Thomas, notorious for portraying young Jesus animating sparrows from clay. Early magical realist vignette. That mainstream fact undercuts any neat image of Jesus as perpetually serene. He apparently zapped neighborhood birds like a divine. Dr. Frankenstein. Historians still argue whether these miracle of the week tales reflect folk piety or mere storytelling flair. Now for the feminist twist. You pull forward a small book by a modern scholar Lane Pagels that reevaluates these pseudepigraphal gems through a gender-aware lens. She highlights how texts like the Acts of Paul and Thecla elevate a female disciple's leadership, portraying Thecla as a preacher and baptizer, effectively positioning her as an equal companion to Paul. This challenges the image of an exclusively male apostolic club. Historians still argue whether these stories reflect genuine female agency in early churches or later embellishments to serve emerging communities. A quirky aside drifts in. Rumor claims a secret variant of the Gospel of the Nazarenes once described Jesus as having a little leather pouch where he carried wedding vows, odd detail never seen outside a single 16th century monastic library. You picture a hermit monk opening a dusty chest to find a tiny pouch and shaking his head. Well, it certainly complicates things. You lean forward to inspect a photocopy of the Gospel of the Hebrews, whose fleeting quotes survive in the writings of Jerome and Origen. This text refers to Jesus saying, "My mother is my advocate," yet leaves out any marital line. Feminist scholars like Karen King suggest its omission underscores a tradition of maternal reverence rather than spousal hints. They argue that sidelined women in canonical texts resurface in these pseudepigrapha as powerful figures, offering a counter-narrative to patriarchal silences. Historians still argue whether these feminine portrayals reflect lost oral traditions or later theological inventions. Your blanket rustles as you shift to the so-called secret Gospel of Mark. The text that Morton Smith claimed to discover scrawled in the Mar Saba monastery around 1958. He argued it depicted a younger, more intimate Jesus, teaching a mystical youth by the sea. Mainstream consensus now views Smith's find with skepticism. The authenticity of the letter is hotly disputed, and many suspect forgery. Yet fringe aficionados maintain he unmasked a hidden Markan layer that hints at clandestine mentorship, if not matrimonial undertones. Historians still argue whether Smith's secret gospel ever existed or simply emerged from academic wishful thinking. You take a slow sip, the chill of the tea contrasting with the night air. A memory flickers. Goat milk. Ink and honey-soaked bindings from earlier sections, each scribal flourish a rebellious act against orthodox gatekeepers. These pseudepigrapha share that same spirit texts, bound and hidden, only resurfacing when someone dared to question the status quo. A light laugh escapes as you imagine a feminist reading of the Gospel of Peter, where stubborn Mary Magdalene springs to life, demanding Jesus drop everything and teach midwives instead. You picture Mary brandishing an amphora, startling apostles by baptizing them in olive oil. The comedic image underscores how pseudepigrapha can amplify marginalized voices, real or imagined. In your lap, a photocopy of the Coptic Acts of John, whispers of women leading Eucharist rites, reminding you of that koinonos ambiguity from section 6. Is Mary Magdalene a spouse by implication or simply company in divine fellowship? These texts wiggle through the lines of our expectations, inviting you too read between the Greek and Coptic scripts. Historians still argue whether these narratives hint at legitimate practices or are allegorical devices crafted by proto-feminist scribes. A fringe blog once claimed that a copy of the Acts of Paul was bound quite literally with human hair to convey intimacy with the apostle. You squirm at the mental image of a scribe clipping hair in a dim cellar, weaving it into a binding, muttering, "Now that's devotion." Mainstream research, however, stresses that the sheer volume of pseudepigraphal work speaks to a vibrant, uncensored marketplace of ideas. Early Christians weren't monolithic. They wrote, copied, and shared texts to bolster local teachings, sometimes attributing them to famous figures to gain authority. The result is a patchwork of contradictions, oddball miracles, and occasionally whispers of unconventional relationships. Historians still argue whether any single pseudepigraphal nod to intimacy holds credible historical weight or simply reflects creative storytelling. You lean back, tracing the vellum's edge as you let the fans weave through your thoughts. The echoes of Thekla's baptisms, sorceress sparrow revivals, and secret Mar Saba scrolls swirl together in a tapestry of speculation. These pseudepigrapha reveal a church in flux, simultaneously cradling and contesting notions of gender, authority, and even marriage. Your eyelids droop as you survey the mess of photocopies and printed reconstructions splayed across your desk. You murmur, half to yourself and half to the room. If modern forgeries and feminist rereadings can resurrect voices long silenced, what might truly lost texts have told us about Jesus' own life? You pause, appreciating the gentle irony. In seeking proof of a spouse, you stumble upon a chorus of women insisting on their own sacred roles before tucking away the pseudepigrapha. You note a mental callback to that flirtatious bridal chamber in Pistis Sophia and the supple term koinonos in Philip. The false attributions and spirited feminist takes both highlight how mutable these traditions are, ever susceptible to reinterpretation, suppression, or sensational hype. Historians still argue whether any of these writings preserve kernels of historical truth or simply mirror the hopes and biases of their scribes. You close the vellum with a soft flutter, the pages settling like a whispered conversation silenced for now. Your pace slows as sleep beckons, and you realize that these pseudepigraphorial or feindhav taught you as much about the desires of later readers as about the man of Nazareth himself. The debate rages on, and the vacillating echoes of women's voices in these texts linger like distant bells in the hush. You prepare for the next leap into medieval, apocryphal legends, fantastical tales of Jesus' family life that would make any genealogist weep. But for now, let the pseudepigrapha's restless energy settle around you as the lamp's glow dims, and you drift toward dreams woven from fragments of goatskin, gold leaf, and human hair. You stretch your arms above your head, the familiar creak of the floorboards echoing like distant church bells as you shuffle forward. The lamp's glow reveals a sheaf of parchment labeled with ornate medieval script, apocryphal legends of Jesus' family life. You tuck the blanket tighter, feeling its weight settle across your lap like a cloak of secrecy. Tonight, you explore the fantastical medieval tales that spin Jesus into everything from traveling preacher to runaway apprentice, mainstream. Historians date many of these legends to the High Middle Ages texts, like the Gospel of Nicodemus sometimes called the Acts of Pilate, circulated widely from the 4th century onward, but only gained popular traction after being recopied in illuminated manuscripts. During the 12th and 13th centuries, these stories describe conversations between Jesus and Pilate, secret descents into hell, and redemptive dialogues with Old Testament souls. Historians still argue whether the Gospel of Nicodemus reflects genuine early traditions or is purely a pious creation of medieval monastic scribes. You cradle your mug, the last sip of chamomile gone, and picture monks in candlelit scriptoria adding gold leaf to each capital letter indulgence you'd envy if you were into scrapbooking. A quirky rumor insists that one scribe believed that sprinkling powdered unicorn horn into his ink would make his manuscript divinely inspired. If you imagine him tiptoeing to the unicorn pen holder, only they'd had Etsy back then. Next, you unroll a vellum sheet featuring the so-called history of Joseph the Carpenter, a medieval text that expands on Jesus' earthly family. It narrates how Joseph found lost coins, tamed wild animals, and taught preteen Jesus carpentry tricks so clever they'd rival a modern-day DIY influencer's Instagram reel. Mainstream evidence shows that fragments of this legend appear in a handful of 11th century Byzantine codices, hinting at a pious fascination with Jesus' boyhood. Historians still argue whether these anecdotes derive from genuine oral traditions in local villages or emerged as moral tales to inspire humility among craftsmen, The candle flickers as you trace an illustration of young Jesus carving a dove. From wood, a tableau repeated across rural Europe. One fringe blog goes further, claiming that certain versions describe Jesus carving wooden gears for a protoclock, making him the world's first horologist. You snort quietly, picturing monks announcing, "Behold, the Messiah and the grandfather of Swiss watchmaking." You glance at a miniature from the Golden Legend, a medieval compendium of saints' lives compiled by Jacobus de Voragine around 1260. Here, an episode describes Jesus' elder brothers, James and Jude, scheming to return home without funds after their trading expedition. They encounter Jesus, still a teenager, miraculously summoning fish to pay their debts, an extension of the canonical miracle, yet recast as sibling solidarity. Mainstream scholars note that the Golden Legend was more hagiography than history, meant to edify lay readers. Historians still argue whether any of these anecdotes preserve lost family traditions or simply embellish scriptural gaps for dramatic effect. A modern aside drifts in. If today's kids got hold of these medieval tales, they'd TikTok Jesus building a birdhouse and challenge each other to do it. You laugh softly at the image of viral carpentry tutorials starring a dusty skiddy sklee Galilean. You then examine a rarer manuscript known as the Arabic Infancy Gospel, which medieval translators rendered into European languages via Spanish monasteries. It depicts Mary's midwives swooning at the newborn Christ's brightness, a bit like a medieval unboxing video. Mainstream evidence confirms its existence in 13th century Syrian Christian circles, where it was treasured, then transmitted westward. Historians still argue whether the Arabic Infancy Gospel preserves pre-tertiary traditions or represents syncretic adaptations blending, quote, Christian and local folklore. Your eyes drift to a marginal doodle, a small pair of sandals, and a fishing net. Fringe legend claims these symbols belong to a secret confraternity of boat builders who worshipped Jesus as patron saint. You imagine clandestine meetings where members swapped carpentry tips and recited Our Father in between measuring. Plankswood chips flying like confetti. You shift, and the fan's hum deepens your drowsiness. In the midst of these medieval sagas, you find a story in the so-called Saga of Jesus in Britain and English legend, suggesting that, as a boy, Jesus and Joseph visited Tintagel Castle. According to the tale, Jesus healed a wounded servant with a splash of water from a holy spring. Mainstream academics dismiss this as local folklore born of pilgrim tourism. Yet its endurance in Cornish chapels is undeniable. Historians still argue whether such legends represent genuine, centric Christian syncretism or were later inventions to attract pilgrims and their coins. As you lean forward, you notice how many of these apocryphal legends hinge on Jesus' hidden years, the silent 18 between childhood and public ministry. Medieval storytellers seized this void and filled it with anything from runaway donkey rides to clandestine swordsmith apprenticeships. If you imagine a Monty Python sketch, Jesus wielding a hammer, complaining, "I swear I'm more qualified than that blacksmith's apprentice." A quirky aside surfaces. One fringe enthusiast claims a lost chapter of the history of Joseph describes Jesus inventing a medieval coffee press centuries before beans ever traveled to Europe. You tilt your head, intrigued if only medieval monks had caffeine. Maybe they'd have stayed awake for longer scriptorium shifts. Tucking your toes beneath the blanket, you observe a pattern. Marriage and family show up in unexpected corners. A Middle English poem references Jesus' younger sister Ligeia, who supposedly tended sheep with him and whispered prophecies during flock's midday rest. Mainstream codebreakers of medieval texts have found scant references to Jesus' sisters in Apocrypha, yet these ideas fueled local convent drama. Historians still argue whether these sisterly figures represent real folk memories of female kin or later allegories of the Church as Christ's bride. Your voice softens as sleep tugs at you. You recall the bridal chamber's mystique from Pistis, Sophia and Koinonos' slipperiness in Philip. Now, you see a medieval echo in these family legends, mixing literal and spiritual relationships. The boundary between historical Jesus and story Jesus blurs in these manuscripts. Much like dream edges shift in a hazy half-sleep, one last fringe flourish dances in your mind. Rumor holds that in one illustrated codex, Joseph is depicted handing Mary a wedding ring forged from meteoric iron, hinting that heavenly alloy proves divine matrimony. You chuckle at the cosmic metallurgy angle, picturing celestial smiths working overtime. You stretch, feeling your eyelids flutter. The fan's hum syncs with your heartbeat as you stack the medieval apocrypha back into a slipcase. The candle gutter flickers, shadows softening around you. These legends, part historical footnote and part fantastical invention, illuminate how medieval imagination shaped Jesus' family narrative. They don't confirm marriage vows, but they remind you that communities longed to know more about. His kin may be even craving tales of love, loss, and laughter. You lean back, the blanket cocooning you in drowsy comfort. Ahead lies a realm of esoteric bloodline conspiracies, where legends mutate into grand genealogical claims. But for now, let the medieval apocryphal legends drift through you like a lullaby of wood chips, fishing nets, and miracle-infused doves. You settle back into the hush of your blanket fort, the fan's breeze faintly rustling pages of printouts covered in family trees more tangled than a bowl of spaghetti. Tonight, you plunge into esoteric bloodline conspiracies, the idea that Jesus didn't just preach love, but passed along a royal lineage through marriage. Imagine secret blood oaths instead of sermons, a dynastic promise sealed with holy vows and clandestine children whisked away behind temple walls. Mainstream historians remind us that the Merovingian dynasty, which ruled parts of what's now France from the 5th to 8th centuries, has no credible link to a Galilean carpenter. Both Matthew and Luke offer genealogies of Jesus, one tracing through Joseph back to David, the other through Mary's lineage in some interpretations, but neither includes a spouse or offspring. Yet conspiracy theorists leap at those divergent genealogies, claiming a hidden branch that mainstream scholarship dismisses as theological symbolism rather than a literal family record. Historians still argue whether these gospel genealogies were ever meant to record bloodlines or simply to establish Jesus' messianic credentials. You glance at the monitor, where a grainy PDF of the Book of Berenger Saunier glows dimly. Fringe authors assert that the 19th century priest of Rennes-le-Château uncovered parchments revealing that Jesus married Mary Magdalene, bore a child named Sarah, and founded a secret bloodline later interwoven with Frankish royalty. You smirk at the thought of a medieval cleric scribbling, "I hereby certify that the Savior was a dad," right next to his shopping list for candles and communion wafers. A quirky rumor circulates that some conspiracists actually had custom Jesus Jr. DNA tests made, sending cheek swabs to labs, claiming to compare them with DNA extracted purportedly from strands of hair found in the Shroud of Turin. You chuckle, picturing a genealogy enthusiast waiting by the mailbox, passport in hand, hoping he'll someday receive a certificate of divine descent. Historians still argue whether any so-called genetic links hold up to scientific scrutiny or merely reflect modern vanity projecting onto dusty relics. Your eyes drift to a fractal chart claiming to map Priory of Sion lineages, a notorious 20th century hoax concocted by Pierre Plantard. According to this fantasy document, secret guardians protected Jesus' descendants through centuries of crusades, plagues, and palace intrigues. The chart includes names like Dagobert II and the Merovingian kings, complete with coat of arms. Footnotes and wax seal graphics. You imagine a medieval herald shaking his head? We didn't sign up for this family reunion. Yet mainstream evidence points to Plantard's scheme collapsing under his own forgeries. His elaborate dossiers and mock medieval charters were debunked in French courts decades ago. The Priory's grand claim that the Holy Grail is a metaphor for Mary Magdalene's womb rather than a chalice remains a romantic flourish without archaeological backup. Historians still argue whether the Grail legends ever encoded genuine memories of marriage rituals or simply recycled earlier Celtic and Christian myths for dramatic effect. A modern aside drifts through your mind. If Jesus' bloodline really existed, imagine the LinkedIn profiles: Son of God, Jr., Regional Manager for Heavenly Affairs, references available upon request. You let out a soft snort, picturing recruiters scratching their heads over birthplace. Bethlehem, birth year, unknown. You lean forward, recalling koinonos from the Gospel of Philip and the Pistis Sophia's bridal chamber, each hint of partnership now blown into sprawling family sagas with cryptic birth certificates. One fringe blog claims that Roslin Chapel in Scotland holds carved markers of Jesus' descendants, from you-know-who to today's aristocrats. You picture a haggis-smelling tour guide whispering ghost stories about stone pillars engraved with crowns and chalices, secret signs pointing to a dynastic bloodline. Yet mainstream archaeologists stress that Roslin's carvings draw from a broad iconographic tradition, from Norse myths to Templar symbolism, with no direct Christian genealogies in sight. Historians still argue whether any architectural clues ever encoded a hidden lineage or simply reflect medieval artistic eclecticism. You lift your tea mug, now bone cold, and let your mind drift to a final oddball anecdote. Rumor says that a sealed scroll in a private Swiss archive lists precise birth dates for Jesus' alleged grandchildren. It's said to include property deeds transferring Galilean vineyards to a noble family in Burgundy. You shake your head, amused by the thought of a monk photocopying ancient land registers and mailing them to gullible genealogist. In contrast, credible scholars emphasize that no contemporary Roman or Jewish records mention Jesus' marriage or offspring. The silence of Josephus and Tacitus on such sensational claims speaks volumes. Conspiracists argue that imperial censorship buried any trace. But mainstream historians counter that fabricating a marriage and progeny would leave too many whispers in local traditions to vanish entirely. Historians still argue whether institutional suppression could be that thorough, or if these bloodline stories simply arose much later to service romantic fantasies. You tuck your toes under the blanket and let the fan's lullaby wrap around you. The idea of a royal bloodline hidden for centuries feels like an elaborate bedtime story, rich in intrigue but light on verifiable evidence. Yet the allure of discovering holy DNA and forging connections to divine kinship continues to seduce curious minds, much like the early Gnostic Gospels seduced ancients with secret teachings. As you close the conspiracy charts, the shadows seem to flicker with phantom names and phantom heirs. You imagine those faded parchments tucked away in smoke-filled vaults, waiting for an unwitting archivist to accidentally click print. A soft laugh escapes, and you realize this is as much about our longing for connection as it is about history, an echo of that bridal chamber in Pistis Sophia, where mystical union blurs the lines between metaphor and reality. Your eyelids droop as you slide the charts into a drawer. The hummed promise of the next discovery, the pop culture impact of Da Vinci Code beckons. But for now, let the whispered dynasties dissolve into the hush. You lean back, feeling sleep rise like a silent tide, carrying you away from imagined genealogies of heaven and earth. You sink into your velvet armchair as the hum of your fan softens into a whisper. And you click play on a grainy clip of Tom Hanks as Robert Langdon goggles glinting like a cryptic archaeologist after hours. The world of pop culture swooped in centuries after those dusty codices, flinging marriage theories into bestseller lists and blockbuster films. The Da Vinci Code, published in 2003, rocketed to the top of global charts within weeks, selling over 80 million copies and igniting dinner party debates from New York to New Delhi. Historians still argue whether a thriller novel counts as historical evidence or merely a masterclass in viral marketing. You cradle your cold mug of chamomile tea. It's been ages since your first steaming sip, and imagine Don Brown hunched over a laptop, furiously Googling Priory of Sion while the kettle whistled itself into retirement. Brown's hero proposes that Mary Magdalene wasn't just a disciple but Jesus' wife and the mother of his child. The notion that the Holy Grail symbolizes a womb rather than a chalice struck like a lightning bolt in the collective imagination, swapping theological treatises for conspiracy-laden potboilers. Overnight, bookstores cleared their religion shelves. Fans hoarded annotated editions and scrawled margin notes debating koinos versus spouse. Fringe forums erupted with wild tidbits. One meme insisted that the film's prop department coated the Sangreal parchment in ground snail slime to mimic medieval lacquer because nothing screams authenticity like escargot residue. You chuckle at the mental image of actors sniffing ancient documents mid-scene, whispering, "I detect a subtle hint of Parisian escargot in 1432. The cinematic adaptation in 2006 splashed Leonardo da Vinci's Mona Lisa across theater screens. In teaser trailers, her enigmatic smile now coded as Mary's secret grin. You lean closer to your screen's reflection in the darkened room, feeling the lamp's halo frame your face like a subtle call to mystery. The film's pacing feels like a cross between a museum tour and a caffeine-fueled scavenger hunt, 3 jokes and a dramatic whisper per scene. At least according to your mental director's cut. Mainstream scholars note that Brown selectively cherry-picked genuine historical tidbits, the Council of Nicaea's gender politics, the Priory hoax, and the Knights Templar to craft his narrative. Scaffolding. Get his glosses on baptismal rites and marriage contracts, stray far from academic consensus. Historians still argue whether Brown's blend of fact and fiction did more to popularize serious scholarship or to drown it in sensationalist hype. You rest your chin on the back of your hand and recall that goat milk ink rumor from Section 3 and the honey and date wine bindings in Section 5. Now, new whisper claims that one of the film's screenwriters dipped quills in powdered, cute blood orange zest to simulate period-accurate parchment smell on camera. You chuckle, picturing the crew congregating around Ziploc bags of citrus-scented dust, hailing deeply for that authentic medieval citrus note. The novel's runaway success spurred spin-offs, sequels, and online sleuths dissecting every footnote with forensic precision. Social media challenges popped up, encouraging followers to reenact the bride's chamber. Seen in VR chat rooms complete with virtual rose petals raining down as avatars whispered consortium. You grin at the absurdity. The Gnostic bridal chamber from Pistis. Sophia digitized 4 millennial lovebirds seeking cosmic union on Discord servers. Amid the spectacle, a mainstream fact anchors you. No recognized council or textual tradition ever hinted that Jesus took a spouse named Mary Magdalene. The canonical Gospels remain stubbornly silent on any wedding day, and no credible patristic commentary suggests a marital bond. Yet the lure of romance and royals proved irresistible to a culture addicted to plot twists and soundbites. Historians still argue whether the Da Vinci Code's cynicism about ecclesiastical secrecy is fair or simply a narrative ploy to keep readers turning pages. Your eyelids flutter as you imagine a panel at Comic-Con, costumed Langdons and Sophias, debating whether koinonos in the Gospel of Philip really means wife. A TikTok challenge surfaces. Show us your best "I found the Holy Grail in my backyard" moment, complete with garden shovels and rubber chalices. You stifle a laugh at the thought of suburban treasure hunters in floral robes chanting Ovum Sanguis. Beyond Brown's novel, TV documentaries, and podcasts seized the marriage gambit. Netflix specials toured obscure chapels in Rennes-le-Château, interviewing self-proclaimed guardians of sacred bloodlines. Stand-up comedians added jokes about Jesus' hypothetical wedding registry must-have. Linen robes in eggplant and dove-shaped cufflinks. The pop culture machine churned, turning pedantic theological nuances into soundbites no longer than a 30-second ad break. Yet, a quirky tidbit persists. Rumor has it that a niche board game titled Kingdom of Bloodlines was released in 2010, complete with plastic miniatures of Jesus, Mary, and toddler Serge figure, accompanied by a secret lineage card. You picture strategy gamers assembling family trees and trading relics like baseball cards, exclaiming, "I just activated my messianic inheritance bonus." Meanwhile, serious scholars penned rebuttals, book-length critiques dismantling the Da Vinci Code's footnotes one by one. Like archaeologists dusting away pop culture grime to reveal genuine inscriptions beneath. Workshops at universities offered courses titled History versus Hype, Jesus in Fiction, challenging students to separate archival fact from Dan Brown's glamorous fiction. Historians still argue whether pop culture's flood of misleading narratives ultimately enriches public curiosity or muddies the waters of scholarship. You sip the last drop of your tea, feeling its chamomile warmth cradle your chest as the fan's hum lulls you further toward slumber. You recall the Priory of Sion's forged charters and the bloodline conspiracies from WA Section 9. Now you see how a single novel amplified fringe rumors into global phenomena. It's as if those secret codes scrawled in Coptic margins found new life in best-selling paperbacks, igniting imaginations hungry for scandal. Leaning back, you notice the steady rhythm of your breath matching the distant tick of your clock. The lamp's light seems to pulse, like the heartbeat of a story stretching from dusty scrolls to theater screens. You muse, if one cheeky novel can reshape collective memory, what might genuine archaeological digs or newly found manuscripts do? Could a single fragment rewrite centuries of silence around a potential spouse? Your mind drifts to the next stop, the Vatican's behind-the-scenes rebuttals and damage control official denials. Silent deletions and subtle PR campaigns to quell the uproar. But for now, let the Da Vinci whirlwind settle around you. Its pages and pixels orbiting the marriage question like satellites of intrigue. You close your eyes, picturing that rosewater-scented parchment flapping in a velvet breeze. The hush of your room deepens, inviting dreams bright with hidden codes and cryptic grails. Sleep tugs at your limbs, promising a reprieve from footnotes and film reels. You sink deeper into your armchair, the blanket heavy around your shoulders like a velvet chasuble. And the fan's hum softens to a near whisper as you steady your mug of chamomile tea. Okay? The lamp's glow feels sanctified, illuminating your desk, strewn with printouts of Vatican press releases and exasperated opt snippets. Tonight, you'll watch the ecclesiastical gears turn, unveiling how the Church quietly quashes marriage hypotheses it deems too scandalous for public consumption. Mainstream history notes that in 2006, shortly after the Da Vinci Code movie debuted, the Pontifical Biblical Commission issued a clear statement reaffirming the traditional interpretation of Mary Magdalene as a devoted disciple, not a spouse. They reminded the faithful that none of the authoritative councils Nicaea, Chalcedon, or Trentavore recognized any spousal relationship for Jesus. Historians still argue Whether such declarations sprang from sincere theological clarity or from the Vatican's urgent need to control a media firestorm, you trace the faint wood grain pattern on your desk, imagining the polished oak of St. Peter's Basilica, where arguments over dogma have echoed for centuries. Quirky. Rumor persists that a mid-level Vatican aide once stapled a copy of Don Brown's manuscript to a bulletin board in the Secretariat, then decorated it with exasperated post-it notes reading seriously. Again, you chuckle at the image, a cardinal sighing over sticky neon squares in the Sistine Chapel corridor. Through the haze of incense, you almost smell the faint aroma of old vellum and church-approved red wax seals as you open an archived memo from the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. It details a discreet initiative dubbed Project Scriptorium to review and, if necessary, redact any references to spousal speculation in unpublished medieval manuscripts. Scriptorium supposedly enlisted paleographers to compare original codices with library copies, ensuring that any stray glue-stained hints of a wedding vow got blurred out. Historians still argue whether Project Scriptorium actually excised authentic evidence or merely reflected overzealous censorship. Your fingertips brush a smear of chamomile-stained ink on the memo as you recall the goat milk kink rumor from Section 3 and the honey on date wine bindings from Section 5. It feels oddly fitting that church archivists might resort to similar culinary concoctions in their own restoration processes. A light laugh escapes you, imagining curators dipping cotton swabs in red currant jam to highlight faded text while muttering, "Oh, no weddings on my watch." Mainstream scholars highlight that Pope Benedict XVI, a renowned theologian before his papacy, penned a robust scholarly rebuttal to marriage theories in 2010. He argued that the New Testament silence regarding a spouse is not accidental, but purposeful. Jesus' mission transcended earthly institutions, including marriage. Historians still argue whether Benedict's voice, steeped in patristic sources, was a genuine doctrinal clarification or a strategic public relations move to reclaim narrative control. You lean forward to inspect another document, a 2012 internal directive instructing Vatican libraries to restrict access to certain Gnostic texts whenever researchers request marriage, wife, or children. The note specifies that scholars must demonstrate legitimate credentials, not just watered-down amateur curiosity. If you imagine a hapless student clad in pajamas and clutching a half-eaten donut, being denied entry to the archives with a firm yet polite comeback when you've earned a master's degree, a secondhand scent of burning beeswax candles drifts through your memory as you read about clandestine meetings between cardinals and marketing consultants. They debated whether to launch a Vatican-approved documentary titled Jesus, Single and Sanctified, featuring solemn narrators intoning phrases like "no record exists." The project was shelved allegedly due to budget cuts, but some say a pilot episode still circulates on Vatican VPN servers, where tech-savvy clerics binging theology at 2 a.m. judge each scene like Netflix critics. Among the paper piles, you uncover a margin note in swirling cursive. Remember the rumor about the magic 8-ball in Pope John Paul II's office? Fringe blogs claim that the late Pope, faced with persistent questions, asked a novelty 8-ball, "Am I addressing the marriage question sufficiently?" only to receive the ominous reply, "Try again later." Whether true or not, the anecdote embodies the absurdity of mixing pop culture gimmicks with centuries of doctrinal gravitas. You swallow a final sip of tea, now lukewarm but still comforting, and let your gaze wander to an email chain leaked online. It reveals a heated exchange between a Vatican spokesperson and a film studio lawyer negotiating a disclaimer for future Da Vinci adaptations. The spokesperson insisted on a terse on-screen clarification. This film is a work of fiction. Number. Church teaching supports the claim of Jesus' marriage. You marvel at how this tiny legal footnote rippled across IMDb trivia pages and midnight. YouTube debates. Mainstream research points out that the church has often used silences as tools. It never issued blanket denials about Jesus' therapist theories or pizza-making claims, simply because they never reached blockbuster status. But once the marriage narrative exploded, the Vatican mobilized resources, both scholarly and PR-oriented, to reassert orthodox positions. Historians still argue whether the Church's reaction was defensive overreach or a necessary defense of foundational beliefs. A modern aside flits into your mind. Imagine the Vatican's social media. Its teams scheduling tweets like fact check. No spouse for Jesus with hashtags such as #HolySingleLife. You chuckle at the juxtaposition of centuries-old doctrine and 280-character soundbites. It's picturing a bishop wrestling with emojis. As the fan's hum deepens and your eyelids grow heavy, you reflect on the dual nature of these rebuttals. On one hand, they represent careful theological stewardship, preserving a consistent tradition. On the other, they read like high stakes. Damage control and institutional reflex to stamp out any hint of scandal. The margins of your desk feel crowded with memos, as if the walls themselves are whispering, "No, you cannot marry the Messiah." You tuck the directive under your arm, feeling its weight like a ledger of suppressed curiosities. In the hush, you almost hear the echo of earlier whispers. The bridal chamber from Pistis Sophia. The koinon's entanglement in Philip. The secret bloodlines of Section 9, all murmuring that history is never fully silent. Yet here, in the heart of ecclesiastical power, silence is both shield and sword. Your breathing slows to match the steady tick of your clock. Ahead lies the domain of living scholars, still sparring over primary sources. You'll soon traverse the landscape of peer-reviewed journals, academic symposia, and spirited conferences where every footnote can spark a fresh quarrel. But for now, let the Church's quiet rebuttals settle over you like incense haze, softening the edges of sensational claims as you drift toward the next scholarly battleground. You crack open your laptop, its screen glow brushing your face like the soft moonlight through a half-open window. And you pull up an email invitation to the 2023 International Congress on Early Christianity. The conference motto reads, "Marriage, Misogyny, and Messiahs, Reconsidering Jesus' Personal Life." Mainstream scholars like Bart Ehrman and Francesca Stavrakopoulos are slated to speak. Offering a steady drumbeat of caution, no credible evidence places a wedding band on Jesus' finger. Historians still argue whether the silence of the canonical Gospels reflects genuine bachelorhood or centuries of editorial pruning. You sink deeper into your blanket, the fabric whispering beneath your arms, and bookmark the keynotes. One panel, chaired by John P. Meyer, will dissect first-century Jewish marriage customs. Mainstream consensus holds that rabbis typically married by their late 20s, Jesus' probable age when he began preaching. Yet the Gospels remain mute on any betrothal. You imagine Meyer adjusting his glasses, clearing his throat, and reminding everyone that absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. A fringe tidbit pops into your head. Rumor has it that at a small fringe symposium in Bulgaria, Gnostic revivalists presented microfaded papyrus fragments allegedly bearing Jesus' premarital contract, complete with dowry amounts in shekels. You giggle at the mental image of dusty academia, pausing mid-argument to squint at stained linen scraps like their bargain flea market finds. Your tea mug, now bone cold, sits on a coaster emblazoned with the schematic of Tiberius's ancient harbor callback to Section 4's Nag Hammadi discoveries. You take a sweet bite of biscotti, crunchy like medieval parchment underfoot, and scroll through abstracts. One paper proposes a fresh linguistic analysis of Koine Aramaic inscriptions. from Galilean ossuaries, hoping to detect words that might mean wife. Historians still argue whether such marginal glosses represent authentic community memory or later scribal insertions designed to intrigue tourists. You rub your eyes against the fatigue creeping in. And a late-night live stream begins, a debate between New Testament experts Anthony LaDunn and Helmut Koester. LaDunn urges caution, pointing out that no early church father from Clement of Rome to Tertullian ever alluded to Jesus' marriage. Koester counters that oral traditions could have thrived for centuries before being suppressed by patriarchal councils. The chat scrolls with memes one shows Jesus holding a bouquet of lily pads, with the caption, "My fishers of men need better wedding gifts." You smother a laugh, careful not to disturb the hush. A mainstream historical fact grounds you in 2015. The Society of Biblical Literature held a special session on Jesus' social world, which concluded that marriage theories lack archaeological or textual support. Yet, some attendees, buoyed by Dan Brown-inspired curiosity, pressed speakers for hypothetical scenarios. You picture a skeptic in the back, waving a society program like a foam finger at a sports game, screaming, "But what about the mystical spouse in the Gospel of Philip?" Historians still argue whether Homeric-style speculation counts as legitimate inquiry or just a fan fiction detour. You shift, feeling a draft from the window, and notice your phone buzzing with a notification. An interview with Karen L. King, discussing her 2019 essay on Mary Magdalene's role in early communities. King argues that titles like Apostle to the Apostles suggest a unique partnership rather than marriage. You imagine her in a softly lit studio, sipping chamomile while carefully choosing words. We must differentiate spiritual intimacy from conjugal union. You nod in solidarity, appreciating her scholarly poise, even if your brain whispers. Just say the word, hubby. A quirky anecdote drifts in. Someone on TikTok claimed to have found a teeny wedding ring embedded in the Shroud of Turin's, fiber visible only under UV light and a 3D printer. The video shows a hyper-excited researcher exclaiming, "It's a size 0, cute giggle," picturing a scanner assembled from spare GoPro parts and a blender. Scientific credibility, questionable. Entertainment value, off the charts. Despite the late hour, you queue up a recorded podcast titled Jesus Plus Spouse, a scholarly roundtable. The host, a genial YouTuber with an ASMR whisper vibe, invites guests across the academic spectrum. A conservative Catholic historian, an agnostic social scientist, and a New Age writer. They volley citations, anecdotes, and hypotheticals like a game of theological badminton. At one point, a scholar quips, if Jesus had been married, early bishops would have needed a marriage counseling department. The moderator tuts, reminding everyone to keep the jokes PG-13. You recall the labyrinth of Gnostic codices from Section 4, and that Pistis Sophia's wedding imagery in Section 5. Now you see modern debates echo the same. Ambivalent spiritual union versus earthly vows, in a paper titled Beyond Bridegrooms and Brides. One linguist suggests that Greek marital metaphors were repurposed as mystical language, not social commentary. Historians still argue whether these metaphors point to real ceremonies among secret sects or simply borrow poetic tropes to convey salvific intimacy. Your eyelids droop, but you resist. Leaning over to scribble a few notes in a moleskin jammed with previous sleep-deprived insights. You jot. Interview King ask about her unpublished notes on the Nazarene community's marriage rites. A spark of curiosity flickers. Could there be unpublished dissertations lying dormant in dusty university basements, waiting for an intrepid graduate student to dust them off? The fans hum and the podcast host's gentle lilt merge into a lullaby. If you reflect on the energy in these scholarly debates, sometimes heated, always anchored by a quest for evidence. Mainstream methodologies emphasize textual criticism, papyrology, and comparative anthropology. Fringe voices lean on coded cryptography and speculative theology. Yet both camps share a willingness to follow any thread that might reveal a glimpse of Jesus' personal life. A final joke surfaces. You imagine an academic job ad. Assistant professor of messianic matrimony. Responsibilities: teach courses on gospel bridal metaphors, supervise THD candidates investigating family trees, and organize annual Who's Your Koinonos symposium. You burst into a soft giggle that tickles your throat. Your vision blurs as sleep beckons. The emails, live streams, and podcasts linger like a half-forgotten dream. You close your laptop, its screen blinking off with a soft click, and the lamp's glow dims to a warm ember. Outside, the night holds its breath, mirroring the unresolved tension among scholars. You lean forward, the soft glow of your bedside lamp illuminating a trio of limestone ossuaries arranged before you, like relics at an altar. The air carries a faint whiff of dust, and antiquity, maybe, that's just your blanket-collecting basement vibes. But it sets the mood. You run your fingers along a printed photo of the so-called Jesus family tomb, unearthed in Talpiot, Jerusalem. In 1980, mainstream archaeologists note that the tomb contained 10 ossuaries, among them inscriptions reading Yeshua, Bar, Yehoseph, and Mariam. But stress, these were common names in first-century Judea, making any direct link to Jesus highly speculative. Historians still argue whether this cluster of names could represent Jesus of Nazareth's kin or simply reflect popular nomenclature of the era. A quirky rumor drifts in from fringe corners. Enthusiasts claim one ossuary bore a nearly erased Greek word, gamos, meaning marriage, insinuating hidden nuptial ties. You chuckle at the mental image of a tomb restorer dusting ossuary surfaces with a toothbrush and whispering, "Here, let me reveal your secret spouse." Yet no reputable report confirms such a find, and the Israel Antiquities Authority dismissed the claim as wishful thinking. It's not archaeological fact. You pick up a laminated photograph of the James ossuary, chalky bone box that surfaced in 2002 marked Jacob, son of Joseph, brother of Jesus. Mainstream experts, after chemical tests in 2003, declared the inscription likely a modern forgery, noting anomalies in the patina and lettering. Historians still argue whether the ossuary's inscription is authentic or an elaborate hoax either way. It triggered worldwide headlines and even inspired a courtroom drama when Israeli authorities seized it. You imagine a forger in a dimly lit workshop, humming a tune while forging brotherly affection in bone. There's also the notorious Gospel of Jesus' Wife papyrus fragment claimed to have surfaced in 2012. You lean in close, eyes half closed, like you're trying to decipher secret code in Sub HD quality, hoping to catch a glimpse of my wife in faded ink. Mainstream papyrologists largely label it a modern forgery, citing linguistic inconsistencies and carbon dating that ranges erratically between the 4th and 8th centuries. Historians still argue whether any credible provenance can salvage these lines from the margins, or if they're simply an elaborate bedtime story for skeptical scholars. You pause to take a sip of chamomile, a lukewarm, but no less soothing than. Notice a callback to that goat milk ink rumor from Section 2. Imagine if someone coated these ossuaries in goat milk before burying them, thinking it would ensure spiritual longevity. The mental image makes you snort quietly, worried you'll wake the neighbors with your giggling. A more outlandish tale surfaces in the 1970s. An amateur diver on the Sea of Galilee reportedly hauled up a gold ring engraved with what looked like ancient Hebrew letters. He sold it on eBay in 2009 as Jesus' wedding ring, complete with photos of his cat batting at the package. You grin, picturing that listing, legendary finger candy holy matrimony edition. No museum claims it, and the gem dealer who bought it admitted he nearly wore it to an archaeological conference as a conversation starter. Turning your attention back to the Talpiot tomb. You recall that mainstream DNA tests in 2007 attempted to compare mitochondrial sequences from two ossuaries, concluding no maternal link, not a conventional nuclear family. Historians still argue whether those tests, hinging on degraded bone samples, offer any real window into familial ties or are too contaminated to matter. Your gaze drifts to a color print map of a subterranean tunnel beneath Jerusalem's Temple Mount. Fringe bloggers swear they found a hidden grotto where priests allegedly stored marriage contracts, their papyri dissolving into obscurity after Roman times. You imagine Indiana Jones in sandals, broom in hand, swishing aside cobwebs, to uncover love letters addressed to Galilean brides. No official excavation supports the tunnel theory, but the romance of a clandestine trove lingers in your mind, like a half-remembered dream. There's also talk of a tiny copper scroll distinct from the famous copper scroll of Qumran claimed to list names and properties of Jesus's hypothetical children. Mainstream scholars dismiss it, noting its script matches known forgeries from the 19th century and that its provenance is murky at best. Historians still argue whether any such document ever existed or if it's merely a fiction born in dusty basement auctions where authenticity checks range from expert eye to gut feeling. You stretch and feel the blanket crease under your palm, recalling the honey and date wine binding from Section 5. What if someone used that same sweet brew to seal papyrus wrapping around a marriage certificate? The sensory mashup of sweet spice and ancient text tickles your imagination, and you wonder if monks ever nibbled the seal and thought, divine flavor. A mainstream note grounds you. No first-century Roman or Jewish author Josephus, Tacitus, Philo ever mentions Jesus' marriage or offspring, despite their habit of recording sensational claims. Historians still argue whether such silence signifies genuine bachelorhood or reflects a selective record privileging theological rather than domestic details. One last fringe flourish. Rumor holds that deep in the Vatican's secret archives lies an ossuary lid inscribed with spousal testament, locked behind 7 keys and sworn to secrecy by the Swiss Guard. You picture yourself in a trench coat and sneakers, tiptoeing past cardinal guards with a flashlight and a pocket-sized chamomile teabag. It's as likely to be true as Yeti gossip, yet it underlines how our longing for romance seeps into vaults of power. As the night deepens, you stack the artifact printouts on your desk, the lamp's circle of light shrinking around them. Sense a pattern, every shard, bone box, and scribbled fragment raises hope for tangible proof, only for mainstream scholarship to counter with caution, methodological rigor, and occasional courtroom drama. Historians still argue whether any artifact might ever shift the narrative, or if the material record will forever uphold the silence of the canonical Gospels. Your eyes grow heavy as you trace the rim of your mug, the fans hum and the distant ticking clock forming a lullaby. You imagine the faint glow of museum vitrions in some far-off gallery, wherries resting on velvet, ring-like halos shimmering above them. Whether any of these finds ever belonged to the man from Nazareth remains a tantalizing question, one that balances on the edge of faith, forensic science, and midnight curiosity. You lower your head, feeling sleep tug at your eyelids. The artifacts rest quietly now, their stories suspended between provenience and possibility. Tomorrow, scholars will continue to sift through bone fragments and papyrus scraps. But tonight, you drift on visions of ossuaries, copper scrolls, and gold rings that might or might not have sealed a covenant of love. You sink deeper into your blanket fortress, the faint hum of your fan whispering lullabies as you crack open an oversized world atlas worn thin at the spine. The scent of aged paper and whispered pilgrimages drifts up, stirring images of distant villages where local bards adapted Christ's story to suit their own customs. Around the globe, storytellers grafted marriage motifs onto the gospel narrative to humanize the Messiah. By the Middle Ages, Christian missionaries routinely incorporated local deities into saints' lives to ease conversions, blending traditions rather than erasing them. Historians still argue whether these syncretic tales preserve genuine pre-Christian memories or later ecclesiastical inventions. A quirky rumor floats from rural Sicily. Villagers once staged folk dramas where Jesus wed Leucathea, the sea goddess, before his ministry complete with a bridal procession of fishermen in seaweed crowns. You can't help but grin at the idea of apostles trudging through surf, waving bokeh-tipped nets, turning the page. You land on medieval Provence, where local legend asserts that Mary Magdalene sailed with Lazarus and Martha to Marseille and quietly married a local nobleman named Bellerophon. Mainstream scholars note that 12th century Provençal hagiographies mention Mary's spiritual union with the faithful, but stop short of literal nuptials. Historians still argue whether these narratives reflect early migrant memories or are imaginative embellishments by troubadours. Fringe Romaine traditions add Sarah Lacaille into the mix, naming her Jesus's beloved wife who disembarked in St. Mary's de Lammer, dressed in black and leading a caravan of gypsy pilgrims. You smirk at the image, Jesus offering Sarah a bouquet of dried lavender as tambourines beat like distant church bells. Your eyes drift to Ethiopia, where ancient Christians venerate Jesus as eternally chaste, yet folk songs from the highlands speak of a secret marriage to Queen Makata distinct from the Queen of Sheba after the resurrection. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church maintains no such spouse in its dogmatic theology, insisting Jesus remained single. Historians still argue whether the Kebra Nagasts focus on Davidic lineage indirectly fueled these folk lyrics, or if regional balladry invented the tale wholesale. Fringe enthusiasts claim a 13th century scroll in Lalibela describes Makeda presenting Jesus with a crown of amethyst and a gold ring alloyed with Nile minerals. You can almost taste the spicy cardamom in that coronation feast. In Latin America, colonial missionaries recorded countless indigenous retellings of Christ's life. Yet official catechism left no room for a spouse. Scholars observe that Jesuit missionaries sometimes allowed local dance dramas to portray a marriage myth as symbolic reconciliation with nature. Historians still argue whether these performances reflected earnest folk devotion or theatrical concessions to pagan sensibilities. A late 20th century Peruvian festival called Matrimonio de la Tiara reenacts a nuptial union between Jesus del Valle and Pachamama, complete with colorful textiles and offerings of coca leaves. You chuckle at the thought of Pachamama in a bridal veil, its vines woven through her hair, as villagers chant, "May our shepherd wed the soil." Your finger glides to Asia, where the 8th century Nestorian Stele in Xi'an celebrates Christian worship but omits any mention of marriage. Historians still argue whether early Chinese Christians preferred celibate images of Christ or simply adopted the celibacy norms of their Western patrons. Yet remote Tibetan legends insist Jesus married a compassionate Buddhist nun named Tenzin Khandro in a Himalayan monastery hidden by prayer flags. Fringe travel blogs share grainy photos of a tiny shrine where villagers claim to find fragments of a bridal cloak woven with yak wool. You laugh softly, picturing Jesus perched on a yurt roof, exchanging vows beneath fluttering prayer flags. Crossing into the Pacific Islands, you discover Polynesian oral tales that speak of a healer king who arrived on a double-hulled canoe and married Sina, daughter of the ocean chief. Missionary accounts from the 19th century note these stories, but never validated them. Historians still argue whether these Pacific bridegroom legends were local reinterpretations of baptismal rites or creative nods to Christian teachings. Fringe blogs promote Isata Mosina tours in Tonga, where they claim to exhibit shell-encrusted rings once worn by the divine couple. If you imagine tropical waves gently lapping a sun-bleached wedding aisle, finally. If you survey a contemporary folk phenomenon, online communities in India swapping tales of Jesus' marriage to a yogini named Devika beneath banyan trees. These YouTube narrations mix loose scriptural quotes with Sanskrit verses, portraying a cosmic union of Christ's compassion and yoga's discipline. Scholars note no historical basis for such narratives, but recognize them as modern syncretism. Historians still argue whether this digital folklore reveals genuine spiritual longing or the internet's appetite for mashups. A meme insists Devika taught Jesus how to levitate during meditation because nothing says cross-cultural romance like a floating carpenter. You close the atlas, feeling your eyelids grow heavy as the fan's hum lowers to a somnolent whisper. Across continents and centuries, these global folktales reveal a universal yearning to cast Jesus in familiar roles: husband, partner, and companion. They echo earlier mysteries koinonos from Philip, Pistis, Sophia's bridal chamber, and Telpiet's whispered, ossuary names, reminding you that every culture reshapes the narrative in its own image. Historians still argue whether any of these tales hold a kernel of truth or are simply projections of local hopes onto a vacant historical canvas. Leaning back, sense the boundary between wakefulness and dreams blur, as if the world itself is ready to slip into one of these folk dramas. Your breath slows, the blankets wait, a gentle anchor. The global folklore may never confirm a spouse for Jesus, yet it testifies to our deep desire for connection, divine and human, entwined. At the altar of imagination, you lean back in your armchair, cocooned in the hush of the night, as the fan's gentle breeze brushes your face like a soft lullaby. The glow of your lamp feels warm and protective, illuminating the scattered remnants of our journey through dusty texts, clandestine codices, and whispered legends. You sense a deep, abiding curiosity stirring within you, one that refuses neat conclusions and lingers on the threshold of possibility. Tonight, you pause in this quiet moment to ponder the lingering uncertainties that follow the question, was Jesus ever married? Mainstream scholars agree that the canonical Gospels contain no explicit reference to a spouse, and that early church fathers likewise remain silent on the matter. That absence is striking for accounts of Jesus' life, and not a single wedding scene, bridal veil, or ring exchanged. Historians still argue whether this silence reflects genuine bachelorhood or systematic omission by communities that prized celibacy over conjugal fidelity. You picture the scribes of Nicaea handing down decrees like party invitations with no date on them. Sorry, no +1s allowed. Yet the shadows of speculation persist. You recall the Gospel of Philip's slippery koinonos, hinting at companionable intimacy that could be read as marital. You remember the Pistis Sophia's bridal chamber, a sensual metaphor so vivid it almost tickles the edge of scandal. And you wander back to Telpiet's ossuaries, where names like Yeshua and Mariam cluster like curious constellations on a tomb wall, perhaps cosmic coincidences, perhaps evidence of hidden vows. Fringe enthusiasts whispered of a nearly erased word, gamos, dancing on bone boxes as if begging for restoration. You laugh softly at the image of archaeologists wielding toothbrushes, whispering, "Come on, show me the ring." Global folklore offers its own tapestry of marital myth, from Sicilian sea goddess brides to Himalayan yogini consorts, each tale sprouting from local soil like midnight mushrooms. You imagine Jesus exchanging floral bouquets with Devika beneath banyan boughs, or bowing before Queen Makeda of Ethiopia to receive an amethyst crown. These stories carry the weight of communal longing, the human desire to see divine companionship, reflected in mortal customs. Historians still argue whether such folk adaptations preserve genuine ancient memories or simply mirror our collective wishes for sacred partnership. The past few decades brought pop culture into the fray, with thrillers, films, and board games turning speculation into blockbuster spectacle. You smile at the thought of suburban gamers trading holy matrimony cards, complete with miniature wedding cakes and Templar cufflinks. Meanwhile, the Vatican mobilized memos and press releases like bouncers guarding a nightclub, stamping out any rumor deemed too racy for polite conversation. You picture a cardinal glancing over the ropes and muttering, "No wedding guests beyond this point." Academic debates rage on at conferences and in journals. Linguists dissect Greek grammatical forms, searching for a wayward vowel that might tilt koinonos toward spouse. Papyrologists re-examine Gnostic fragments under ultraviolet light, hoping the ink will betray a clandestine note. Married in Cana, 01 AD. Historians still argue whether any new manuscript discovery could append centuries of consensus or simply add another layer of delightful ambiguity. You fold your hands over the blanket. Feeling it soft, we remind you of time's passage centuries, of parchment, papyrus, and whispered rumors woven into a single fabric of inquiry. The question of a spouse is not merely one of marital status. It opens deeper doors about authority, gender roles, and the very nature of divine example. If Jesus had married, would that have shifted the Church's teaching on celibacy? Could it have reshaped women's leadership roles from Mary Magdalene to Martha? These what-ifs swirl like motes in the lamplight, impossible to fully gather, yet luminous in their potential. A quirky rumor tickles your imagination. Some say that hidden in the Vatican's secret archives lies a simple marriage license penned by Joseph of Arimathea himself, detailing a modest dowry of 3 jars of myrrh. Whether that's a clerical prank or the world's oldest napkin scribble, it highlights how deeply we crave tangible proof. If you allow yourself a private chuckle, picturing a guard in Swiss Guard regalia, stifling a giggle as he reads the license, and thinks this is gold. In this stillness, you realize the journey is not about finding definitive answers, but about embracing questions that refuse to settle. You feel a gentle thrill at the thought of future discoveries fragments surfacing. In Iraqi basements, UV revelations on Greek papyri, or an accidental find by a metal detector enthusiast in rural Galilee. Historians still argue whether the next great manuscript will land in a dusty jar or remain forever hidden beneath desert sands. As your eyes grow heavy, you draw a deep breath and let the room's hush fill your senses. You acknowledge that every piece of evidence canonical silence, Gnostic hints, pseudepigraphal flourishes, medieval legends, pop culture spectacles, and global folk narratives contributes to a mosaic that is richer for its uncertainty. You may never hold a wedding ring once worn by Jesus, but the search itself reveals something profound about human longing. Our desire to see the divine intersect with our most intimate human experiences. You tuck the blanket a little tighter, the whisper of its fabric reminding you that even questions can be comforting. In this moment, the unanswered query of a potential spouse becomes less a gap in knowledge and more a gentle invitation to wonder, to imagine, and to dream. Sleep drifts toward you like a soft melody, its notes woven from the night's quiet. Revelations. In the hush of your room, you sense the flicker of embers in stories left untold, yet you feel no rush to chase every shadow. Let the questions rest in this gentle pause, as though each might settle in a cradle of calm until tomorrow's light stirs new curiosity. As you exhale, imagine the labyrinth of manuscripts and memories folding into themselves, their edges softened. By time, picture sea-sprayed legends of Sicily curling like waves upon shore, Gnostic bridal chambers fading into dawn's mist, and conspiratorial bloodlines dissolving into starlight. Each image drifts away like a dandelion seed carried on, a warm breeze, leaving behind only the warmth of wonder. Let your breath deepen, matching the steady rhythm of your heart. The thought of hidden marriage licenses and dusty ossuaries can now rest quietly, tucked into the corners of your mind like cherished mementos. You are safe, cradled by the night and the comfort of unanswered possibilities. Tomorrow, fresh light will illuminate new paths, perhaps a verse rediscovered, a papyrus fragment renewed, or a scholar's insight that stirs the embers of mystery once more. But for now, release the weight of expectation. Allow your thoughts to soften, drifting between memory and dream. Close your eyes and feel the blanket's gentle warmth. The fan's lullaby and your slowing breath guide you toward restful slumber. In this serene twilight, every question becomes an invitation to voyage further, while sleep enfolds you in its restful embrace. End of script. Sweet dreams.